they love to label anyone that says, basically, you know, I think we should have a society based on non-aggression and cooperation and voluntarism, right? These are people actually being labeled selfish or dangerous. So let's delve into that a little bit and see whether there's truth to that. So one current example is with the whole sickness that's been going on and all of the lockdown protocols and, you know, orders and such that have been coming down the pipe. And people that have been resisting these orders, these restrictions on liberty, are oftentimes labeled as exactly those two things, selfish and dangerous, right? Because you're not considering the welfare of others, right? All you care about is your freedom, right? Like you're so selfish, right? You're actually dangerous. You're so obsessed with freedom that you can't even see that there is a real sickness going on in the world and real people are dying. Like you're just so narrow-minded that it's actually dangerous, right? That's the perspective, right? And I can kind of put myself in their shoes for a second. And, you know, like I was saying before with like the progressive with his list of policies to make the world a better place, like I can understand, you know, when you're in that position, it seems kind of reasonable. Like you seem like you're in the righteous position. You got the moral high ground, but it's not actually true. So I'm going to try and explain exactly how it's not true by giving a real conversation or debate that I've been involved with, but I know many other people have been, concerning these so-called lockdown orders that have been escalating, which is no surprise to me. Like I said to many people, and, you know, said in an audio that was actually taken down because of so-called guideline violations, that there is such a thing as a true slippery slope. That if you know, the old saying, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, that there's truth to that. If you let an abuser get away with a small amount of abuse or a subtle level of abuse, it's likely that they're going to increase that. So the thing is to be alert to even subtle levels of abuse and reject it at that level. Otherwise, it will likely be increased. And that's exactly what's been going on. So with the escalation from saying you have to put something over your face to now talking about, oh, and you need to get tested and you need to get vaccinated as well, right? So they're escalating. Starts with a covering on your face and now is invading your body, literally, right? So something that's coming up now with the testing is they're just repeating the claim of any resistance being selfish and dangerous, just as they would do to someone being against being forced to wear a mask. They're now, in labeling them selfish and dangerous, they're now saying the same about anyone who declines to be tested or vaccinated, right? So medical privacy used to be considered, and not long ago, right, in this country, like almost like a sacred thing. Like you didn't get to invade someone's personal medical information. Like that was a clear violation, right? And legally too. Like that was something you could get in big trouble for if you invaded someone's medical privacy, or if you shared private medical information about someone to others. Like that was, you know, considered criminal, and I think it still is, but it's just less so now, especially with what's going on. So the issue here, let's talk about like this idea of if you don't submit to being tested, that you're being selfish and dangerous. I wrote a note here. So the idea being everyone should get tested, and test results should be public knowledge, and the state can take whatever action towards those who are said to have positive test results, and that they, of course, with their team of credentialed experts, right? They're the authority, right? They know best. Say should be done to that person. So when you say, I think everyone should be tested, and if you're just looking at it from this simplistic level of, well, that way we can know, who has it and they can take appropriate measures. Right, I get that perspective, but what you're not even considering is the possibility that, number one, the test is flawed in some way, or number two, that it's purposely flawed, maybe at times, right? I had a buddy the other day, like, make the joke, right? Like they got the switch under the tester, right? And if they want to send you away, they just flip the switch and then the light turns up red instead of green, right? Like, that might just sound like a silly conspiracy theory to you, but it's not unheard of. Like, I'm saying it's not an impossibility. Like, it is possible that someone who is given that power to test other people and then decide what is the action to be taken against that person, if the test results come out positive, it is possible that someone in that position may not be angelic or may not be completely knowledgeable about what the best thing to do is, all things considered, right? So they've been given the authority to basically rule over someone else's life in the name of safety, right? That person, once they submit to the test, basically is put in a position of a slave to the tester, right? And you might say, oh, well, it's not just the person testing, right? It's going to be fact-checked, and it's going to be, supervised, and you're going to have, all these experts on some kind of board that's going to be created, and it'll be made, we'll have these safeguards, right? And again, like I was saying earlier, this belief that you can dominate the dominators with safeguards is, to put it simply, naive. And so, someone that thinks that you can set up a dynamic like this is actually being very dangerous themselves, right? You're actually setting up an extremely dangerous precedent for society, where invading people's, attempting to invade people's private medical information is considered legit to begin with. And then on top of that, based on how the results come out, the person doing the test and then can completely dominate your life and make decisions for you and, quarantine you or whatever, basically imprison you and maybe treat you, right? Oh, and if those treatments turn out to have major side effects, including death, whoops. But the ends justify the means, right? We just gotta word and, save society by ruling over them and dominating them and completely disregarding people's right to control their own body, completely disregarding people's own autonomy, completely disregarding people's right to not be subject to preemptive attack, right? Let's just forget all that and march forward towards the utopia at hand. So in that conversation, a couple other elements that could come up in that debate is someone saying, well, if you don't get tested, you're being selfish and dangerous. And then I might respond, what's the difference between selfishness and self-love, right? Because in this case, any act of self-preservation, any act wherein you're just taking a precautionary measure to preserve your own life, to not risk your life being harmed by whatever authority figure, how is that invalid? How is that just completely selfish, right? Again, the only way that you could see that as completely selfish is if you have perfect faith in whoever the authority is. The only way you could see that as completely selfish and in no way containing any healthy amount of self-respect, self-love, self-preservation is if you have completely idolized whoever authority is, right? Unless you have a statist view, unless you're operating under statist psychology, right? Not wanting to basically hand over your life, risk handing over your life to a so-called authority figure by saying, okay, I'll just trust that your test is accurate, and I'll just trust that whatever you say is the right action to take if you say it comes out positive. That's like basically playing Russian roulette. You're saying, well, you know, I haven't actually harmed anyone. I haven't done anything bad here, but all right, you know, if this is for the greater good, you know, if this is what I need to do in order to not be selfish and not be dangerous, you know, I don't want to be either of those, so let me submit to your dangerous and selfish proposition, which is to dominate others, rule over them, micromanage their lives, and even imprison or harm them against their will because you think it's the best idea, because it serves your interests and your ego, right? So again, it's completely flipped. Who's actually being selfish and who's actually being dangerous? So I was having a good conversation with someone the other day, and he brought up this analogy, which I thought was brilliant. And he was talking about how with computer software, computer systems, with operating systems, you have those that are more open source versus those that are more doing their own thing. They're not asking you for permissions to carry out whatever operation, and they're, you know, doing things in the background. They have this whole, you know, background operation to them that you can't access or alter, right? So he was explaining how the more open source ones that ask you permission along the way are actually the types of operating systems that are less likely to get a computer virus. They're less likely to be corrupted and do something bad to you, to your information, you know, etc. And so, you know, this is a pretty fascinating analogy and parallel to what's going on, wherein the software, basically, the operating system, is either taking a cooperative stance toward the user, right? It's like, is it okay if I do this? And then the user responds, yes, go ahead. And then it proceeds like that. Versus a different type of operating system, which doesn't ask you permission. It just goes ahead and does it. It doesn't even let you know what it's doing, right? Whether you like it or not, it's gonna download this information and send that information and alter this and do that, all without your permission. And then because of that, it actually ends up being a less safe operating system, right? So the parallel here being that if you live in a society where those taking the role of operating system don't need to be given permission to do anything, they can just go ahead with whatever preemptive attacks against you that they deem necessary. That's actually dramatically decreased the safety of that society. They have then become vulnerable to, you could say, the virus of communism, right? The virus of totalitarianism, right? The virus of Marxism. So that's something to keep in mind, right? A system that doesn't dominate is actually safer, right? So again, getting upset with those that are hesitant to just give their lives away to whoever the ruling authority is foolish. You're not recognizing that freedom is another form of safety, right? You're not even open to the possibility that there could be severe abuse of power, because you just believe in the dominators themselves, or you believe in these other checks and balances that are dominating the dominators. Being forced to trust someone is being forced to take a risk. It's actually being told that self-love is unacceptable. It's selfish, is what they're saying. That if you don't like the idea of risking your life by trusting someone with your life that you don't know, or that is in a position of power that historically has been a place of corruption and atrocity, you know, that's not a possibility. You can't think that. That's a thought crime. Don't you dare think that self-preservation or a little caution on your end is reasonable. You're just being selfish. You don't care about the sick old people. But again, forcing people to trust authority with their lives like that in a preemptive attack does not equate to social justice. That's actually a social injustice. So, you know, so much of what's going on in recent days is so Orwellian. You know, and just to highlight another couple Orwellian Orwellian moments that stood out to me was when they had the football player kneeling to the flag, and they spun that to equate to a rebellious act. Kneeling. Do you understand what kneeling represents? Like, do you understand what that is? It's declaring submission to a master. Right? That's why faithful people say, you know, the only person I kneel to is God, right? It's a very significant act. And it was twisted into an act of rebellion. You know, submission equals rebellion, right? So that's the Orwellian thing about it. You know, just like in the book, 1984, war is peace, right? Submission is rebellion. And another one more recently was a famous movie actor lost his cool on the set of a new movie he's making, and he was yelling at some of the people in the crew. I guess they didn't have their face coverings on at all times or something like that. And he just went off on them, and he was talking about how they were being, guess what, selfish and dangerous. And the twist that he added to it was that they were neglecting the fact that, you know, the movie industry is supplying so many jobs that are putting food on the table of poor people, right? People in economic straits are relying on this industry, and here you are just being selfish and dangerous. So this again is Orwellian, because someone who's actually advocating compliance with the idea that the state owns your body is taking the role, or is being shown as a warrior for the poor and downtrodden, right? He's standing up against these selfish and dangerous people, right? Meanwhile, he's condoning and guilt-tripping people into accepting that they have no bodily autonomy, no right to control their own bodies, no right to make their own medical choices. Never mind all that. Submit. Otherwise, you're selfish and dangerous. So, an interesting article, which I'll link to, is titled, "The Not So Wild, Wild West." And in this article, they talk about the reality of what we call the Old West is a bit different than how Hollywood has portrayed it. basically that it wasn't actually as horrible and dangerous as it often is portrayed. Which shouldn't be surprising, right? Because if, a movie wouldn't be so exciting if nothing really was going on. If people were just getting along like, how's it doing, George? Oh, good, Bob, how are you? All right, take care. 2 hours of that isn't going to exactly make for a good Hollywood movie. So one of the things that is pointed out in this article is that there was actually an incredible amount of cooperation that went on voluntarily, right? There wasn't really strong government presence at all, right? A lot of times things were settled man to man, woman to woman, because of that frontier aspect of what was going on, right? Things were just getting developed as far as a society, you could say. As far as the frontiersmen, of course, there were countless Native Americans involved that had their own society and livelihood and communities going on. So one of the things he pointed out, though, was that between the frontiersmen, one of the reasons why they were able to come to agreement more often than not was because they were both on an equal level of power. And more specifically, they both had guns. They both had guns of equal firepower, basically. Pretty much all the men had revolvers, right? And these revolvers were all basically, on the same level of power. It wasn't like anyone was rolling around with tanks or something like that. Everyone was armed, and that armament was of basically the same amount, the same value. So people were not able to take a position of domination over others, because if they tried to dominate others, they would just quickly be put in check, to put it mildly, right? And so that, I thought, was an interesting point. That when people are in an equal position of power, right, when one person or one group isn't dominating over another, they actually cooperate more. There's a famous observation that the friendliest, most polite people you'll come across are at a gun show, right? And why is that, right? It's because everyone's there is, basically on the same playing field. It's like no one's gonna think that they can get away with being abusive, right? No one's gonna think that they can get away with dominating, ruling over others, right? And so by not having any positions of power where people are given more and more tools of domination and are able to make those beneath them weaker and weaker, through extortion and disarmament, can you see that the original, the Old West, in this contrast, is actually the safer position? Or, just forget about the Old West, just think about two groups of people. One wherein they all have equal power over one another, right? No one has the means really to dominate over the other. Versus another group of people where a few are able to dominate the others because they have all the weapons, and on top of that, maybe they're extorting the others for money, which is putting them in an economic weak position, encouraging further subservience and submission, right? The first group, the former group, is a better situation. It's more socially just. It's actually less dangerous and less selfish. The latter group is more dangerous and more selfish. So to say, don't tread on me, is actually just saying, don't commit aggression against me or anyone else. It's a principle for everyone to adopt. Everyone should reject domination. Unfortunately, oppressed people often think that the answer is to become the dominators themselves, right? So they, instead of advocating a world in which there is no one dominating anyone, they just think we need to become the dominators, and they start taking on that role as best they can, or in whatever niche they can, whatever avenue they can. So if they've experienced domination that included racism, well, then you actually see some of these folks becoming racist themselves, start taking racist actions themselves, right? They're taking the role of the oppressor. They're becoming the evil that they deplore, right? So this is really unfortunate, because domination isn't the answer to domination. Like I was saying before, the answer to slavery is no more slavery. It's not to form your own slave operation. The answer to abuse isn't your own abuse of others. So this is real fundamental ethics that might seem just overly philosophical or something like that, but it's not. It's completely relevant to what's gone on historically, and it's completely relevant to what's going on today. And it's actually what needs to be understood if we're actually going to get off of this true slippery slope and choose a sane, ethical path forward, which again is not either of the ways that were being said or the possibilities, right? You're either the crazy rioter, with all of these Marxist views, or you're the ultra-patriot, super nationalist or whatever, right? Those aren't the only possibilities. Another possibility is actually just taking the sane view that domination hasn't worked out for humanity. Humans ruling over humans hasn't been working out, and is actually really dangerous. And anyone that advocates it is coming from a statist psychology, right, which is fundamentally based on the fallacy of appeal to authority, right? And also the fallacy of a false dichotomy, that it's either this or that. We either have this government-style way of setting up society, or it's complete chaos and madness and Mad Max, terrible, just never-ending, wild, wild west, right? Again, this article, I encourage you to read, pointing out that, anarchy is oftentimes painted as, oh, such a terrible thing, but people point out, like these gentlemen with this article and others, that actually anarchy is just people not dominating over each other, not ruling over each other, and cooperating with each other. So this actually happens all the time, right? You go to the farmer's market, whatever, in communities, especially rural communities, but even in urban areas, people cooperate voluntarily, help each other, choose not to dominate over each other, right? This is actually the norm. This is actually just being connected with your true fundamental nature, which is good, and not getting caught up with these toxic emotion thoughts that lead you to believe being a dominator is a good thing, right? Or being dominated is a good thing, right? Fear supporting an inferiority complex where you think that it's good to be dominated, and conceitedness being another toxic, demonic emotion thought, which is fundamentally a superiority complex, right? Where you think You are superior, so therefore you have the right to rule. Right? If you're free from both of those, you recognize, well, I deserve respect and love, but so does my neighbor. Right? You recognize that loving others as yourself is the rational way to go. It's not extreme, it's not selfish, it's not dangerous. It's actually the way to a less selfish, less dangerous world. So I hope you found some of these points interesting and helpful. Thank you for listening.